Do you know that storytelling is important in marketing, but you're not quite sure how to do it? Yeah, me too. And that's why I worked with my guest and also my friend. So definitely stick around because she's going to be spilling all of her storytelling tips, and you're going to really vibe with all the information that she is going to be providing, as well as action-oriented tips. So make sure you have your pen and paper ready. If you're taking the kids to the grocery store or you're walking the dog, just come back, rewind it, and write it down because it's going to really help you in growing your business. Welcome back. If you're new here, I'm Jen Vasquez, a Pinterest marketing manager and strategist who brings in marketing experts to help you take action and grow your business. And today, this has been a long time coming. You made me work for this, Heather. I finally have Heather Rameau of Storytell Her Co. I love her company name. Heather is a brand strategist, storytelling expert, writer, and speaker. And as the founder of Storytell Her Co., she guides female entrepreneurs to tap into their inner storyteller, to share their unique message, connect deeply with their audience, and attract soulmate clients into their business. I love that. Heather is an ex-corporate climber who now lives each day in pursuit of her passion to help women make deeper impact. And she is a frequent speaker on personal branding, storytelling, releasing shame from your story, and building a heart-led business, as well as navigating entrepreneurship as an empath. She has been published in Medium and Authority magazine. Welcome, Heather.
Thank you, Jen. This, I kid you not, is a long time coming. I am just tickled pink to be here.
I know. So for those of you who don't know, I say this all the time. I try not to say I'm bad at this, but I have a very, very hard time coming up with stories in my writing of emails or social media or whatever I'm doing. Now, I have a story when I'm talking with my personal friends till the cows come home. But for whatever reason, I had a block with that. And oh my goodness, Heather has helped me and kind of created a little bit of a monster, but we'll get back into that a little bit later. I always love to start with this first question for all my guests. I want to know, Heather, I want to know what jobs came before this job, how you entered into this, like creating this business, like how did you get from A to Z?
Yes.
Tell me everything.
Amazing question to get started with. So my journey in entrepreneurship really is the result of a crossroads that turned into a crisis. And so for me, my background is in corporate. So I really did what I was supposed to do, what I was always told would bring me success and fulfillment and happiness. I went to college. I took out a lot of loans to get the degrees, and I went into the corporate world, and I really snuggled my way into this very cozy, cushy path of I was in consulting, and really it was everything that I was supposed to be doing, but I was so deeply unhappy. It felt like there were two versions of me that I was living. It was the day version where I was this analytical, presenting machine where I was churning out decks for meetings and really lost a lot of the creative side of me, which was the writer, the reader, the thinker, the storyteller, all of that. I feel like there were two pieces. And I say it was a crossroads because for a really long time, I knew that I was on the wrong path. I was not unaware of that, but I didn't know what to do about that. I didn't know how to get off that path. And frankly, I thought that having the stable career, the good paycheck, the good benefits, all of that, I thought that was enough of a sacrifice for my happiness and for my fulfillment. I thought if I had that, then it was okay that I was stifling a piece of who I was. You know, I did that for many, many years. And And then the crisis hit. My entire world came crumbling down in 2017 when my dad passed away. It showed me in that moment that your life will end, whether you want it to or not, whether you have unfinished business or not, whether you have shared your story and your message and your magic and your power or not. And that was a pivotal moment for me. And I wish I could say immediately that I like quit the corporate job and, dove headfirst into my passions and all of that, but that's not the truth. It took me many, many years of diving first into personal development, then into growth mindset and self-optimization and therapy. And slowly each of those pieces led me and introduced me to the world of entrepreneurship. They kind of go hand in hand almost. If you're on that personal growth journey, you often somehow end up with the entrepreneur space. And so that's how I made that little bit of a jump. And I wish I could say as well that I arrived to entrepreneurship and knew exactly what I wanted to do, but that is also not the case. I had probably 2 to 3 business ideas that I tried to start and get off the ground, and they just weren't working. It wasn't taking off. And I'm actually now very grateful that those didn't take off, because it led me here to where I am. But the pinnacle for me of really moving into branding and storytelling was quite funny. I was in branding. I was doing some visual design, like creating logos and typography suites and color palettes and things like that. But I was never inspired by the visual. I was always inspired by the story behind the brand. So as a newbie entrepreneur, I'm out here pitching like $500 brand logo packages and all of that. And I was getting some bites because they were so lowly priced. But I wanted to dive into the person, into the story. And I was getting a lot of resistance with the clients who were hiring me at first because they just wanted a logo. They didn't really want to peel back the layers. And so I started moving into personal branding. And what drove me to storytelling is actually pretty recent. So I'd say within the past 18 or so months, we have been seeing a massive shift in marketing and the online industry and social media of storytelling. It's almost like a hot topic and really trendy these days. And I started noticing a lot of business coaches and strategists and experts and like marketing gurus basically like shouting from the rooftops that you're supposed to tell your story and you're supposed to create content that tells a story and you're supposed to be your authentic self. And I was sitting there receiving those messages being like, but how? What am I,
Yeah.
what am I supposed to do?
I'll be authentic. Yeah, I'll be
Yeah.
authentic all day long and say how I feel and what I feel,
Yeah.
but telling a story is a whole nother muscle, in my opinion.
Oh, yeah. Or it's like, the 3 tips to build your business. Tip 1 is like, share your story, but there was nothing like there. And so I started to get frustrated because I was like, I have a really powerful story. I bet other people do too, but I know I've got one. I have a lot of insights, a lot of wisdom, a lot of things that I want to share, but I couldn't find anyone to help me figure out how. And then finally, it was almost like as clear as day. One day, I was like, oh, it's because I am supposed to be that person. I am supposed to create this unique offering and perspective and service of blending personal branding, storytelling, marketing, copywriting, and also the mindset, also that permission to be visible and own your story, release the shame from your story, that type of inner work. I wasn't finding it anywhere because I was supposed to create it. And so that's how I got to this point that I'm at now.
And you're so right, because everyone says that.
Yeah.
Share your story, share your story, share your story. And then we either go overboard where we vomit
Yes.
out everything and then never do it again because we were told to do it and we did
Yes.
it, but we're not going to do it again, which can be shocking and jarring, I
Yes.
guess. Or we're just avoiding it like the plague. And I think one thing that you do that you didn't even touch on, that for me you did, It was the how to
Hmm.
tap in to my stories. Like
Yes.
having conversations with you, working with you, stories came up over and over and over
Yeah.
again. And you weren't asking a question of me. You were asking me to either elaborate or go deeper, right? Because
Yes.
we stay very shallow oftentimes on
Yes.
social media. And so, yeah, of course, we'll be getting into this. But
Yes.
if you're anything like me out there, audience, and you feel like storytelling or sharing your story is a very big, overwhelming, and scary thing to do how would someone like that get started?
Yes. So I hear you so much on this because I think we often take our stories too seriously. And first, I want to say, let's have fun sharing our stories. I know we all have some challenging moments from our past that make us who we are. There's lessons and heartbreak and rock bottoms and all of that in your stories. But it's also really healing and fun to be able to share what we know to help someone else. So always think about from a place of service. Is this something that I'm sharing? Can this help someone else? Will it impact someone else? Will it inspire someone else? So I always think that mindset is so crucial when we approach storytelling. And if you're listening to this and you're just so overwhelmed because you're like, okay, Heather, I have lived decades of life. I have a lot of story to tell. How do I even start to
Mm,
grab at that? Like, how do I start to grab at my story and kind of piece it together into something that's a little more malleable that I can actually get my hands on, I can feel and start to mold into a story? I have three questions that you can ask yourself to, again, if you are at the place where you need to start grabbing at your story, here are three questions to ask yourself. The first one is, who was I? That's going to give you insight into your beginnings, the start of the story, a lot of the things that perhaps you were struggling with or feeling, those fears and mindset beliefs, all of that. Think, who was I? Then ask yourself, what happened? And this is going to be different for every person, for every story, for every instance of your life. But again, high level questions, what happened? That's going to give you where the conflict really turns up, where the tension turns up, where the story starts to advance in the start of that arc. And then ask yourself, who am I now? And I by no means mean for you to have to be this perfect arrival of your future self. You don't have to have hit X goal, X milestone, X, Y, whatever it is, whatever that level or threshold. What I mean is, what have you learned? What perspective has shifted? What values are you taking with you into the future? Those three questions can start to give you the most basic story arc for you to think about both your story at large, but also those micro, smaller stories as well. That's a great place to start.
so good. Um, I'm going to probably be saying that through this whole podcast. Forgive me in advance, and YouTube channel. Are there any exercises or strategies or kind of quick hacks that you might recommend for developing a compelling brand story?
Yes. So definitely what I had just shared about the 3 points of the story arc,
Yes.
that's going to be a good place for you to start. But in terms of other hacks in telling a compelling story, right? Because it's one thing to get clarity on the story, and it's another thing to be able to deliver that story in a compelling
Yes.
and an enticing way. Here's a great place to start. People always get stuck on two things with the story. Really, like, how do I get started with the story and how do I end the story? So, if you start your story, this works for both written and verbal stories, it works for both. If you start your story in the moment of like highest tension or biggest conflict, or like when the stakes are the highest, if that's where you come in and start your story, whether that is, speaking, you're starting your presentation, whether that's your hook on Instagram or the first line or subject of your email, if you start at that level of conflict when the tension is high, you're going to pull people in because we pay attention when there's perceived danger. We pay attention. Our brains are like, ooh, what's going on? Do I need to be aware of this? Is this going to impact my ability to survive? And so that is one of the greatest ways to get people's attention, is because you actually create an energetic response out of them when they read something that they perceive as danger or scary or a threat. Plus, people are curious when you start at that moment of tension. They're wondering, what are you going to do? How are you going to make it through this? Are you going to be okay? So that's a great place to start a story. And on the flip side, how do you end your story? It's a little tricky because your stories don't really end, right? We are still alive and going and learning and changing and evolving. And that's different from what we think of a traditional story, of a storybook or a fairy tale, of a beginning, middle, and clear end. So what we can do instead is focus that end on whatever the takeaway is of that story. So what's the lesson? What's the moral? What do you want someone to be thinking about after they put that story down? Or a couple hours later as they're washing the dishes or walking the dog? What do you want them to be thinking about? What is that takeaway? That is a great way to end the story. So you leave your audience on a high note or an inspired note or a curious note. Curiosity is a great way to end your story because it keeps people coming back for more.
That is such good advice. Oh my goodness. Okay, so let's say we've talked everyone into storytelling more.
Yes. Yes.
How do they like get started with story-driven type of content, especially
Yes.
when our audience might not be expecting this type of content? And how do we mix it in with our other content?
Yes. So what you're absolutely going to want to do is create a story bank. This is one of my top tips, one of my favorite things to help clients with, because you want to always have ideas and inspiration at your fingertips. And here's the reality is that great storytellers are truly just very observant people. You do not innately need to be an incredible writer or an incredible speaker innately, right? These are learned skills. You can always become a better communicator. But in order to first find a story, you have to be observant and introspective. So if you can train yourself to, even throughout the day, watch how people are interacting, look for stories, pay attention to how you are responding and feeling about certain things that are happening or certain things that you're seeing. That is a great way to start observing. And then you need somewhere to catalog all of those ideas so that when you're going to create content, you can find the story that you want to tell. So a story bank is basically just a fancy way of jotting down all of your ideas and having some sort of organization that makes sense to you. So many people use just a Google Doc or, a spreadsheet. I often have on my phone like a voice note app that if I'm out and about and I think of something or I see something, I will speak it into that app, because that as well helps me listen back to my tone of voice, to the words that I emphasize, and that helps me pick out what's really impactful to that story. So I would say first thing you can do and should do is create a story bank so that it's easier for you moving forward to think through what ideas that you had and how you can share those with your audience.
So this was advice that I got when I was working with Heather, and I am not one to like log things. Like I'm very
Yeah.
organized for client work, but for my own work, I'm not as organized. So I'm like copy bank. I mean, story bank. Okay. All right. All right. But I found myself waking up from a dream or having a conversation with one of my kids or my husband, or I'm at the grocery store and someone's talking about something that
Yeah.
jars a memory for me.
Yeah.
Right. And I like to use Voxer. They have a way that you could Vox yourself. And
Yes.
so I will do that. And so I will go in the middle of the night, even if it hits me. Oftentimes when I can't sleep, I've got those thoughts swirling around. And so
Yeah.
putting them in Voxer. And then I've now been using Asana like a good girl.
Wow.
I mean, I've been using a lot of things. I've tried it all, Monday, Trello, you name it. But
Yeah.
Asana seemed to be not as robust, but it is robust. But it made sense to my brain, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm putting all of those in Asana every day, clearing out those voice messages. Didn't
Yeah.
think about the inflection and stuff, but that's brilliant. I will make a mental note of that. But when I sit down to write a blog or an email, which is really where I usually am doing that,
Hmm.
I write down not only stories, but analogies. I find
Yeah.
learning from stories and analogies the most profound and the easiest way for people to understand kind of what I'm saying. And so my story bank is filled with these, and I can just tap into that, especially if it's a day, because writing can be very hard for me.
Yeah.
I know the wisdom I want to impart to help and serve those that are following me, but I'm a very direct person, and
Hmm.
for me storytelling is kind of like flowery, but it's
Hmm.
not, because the things that have resonated the most in my emails and where I get people replying back
Yeah.
are when I'm doing those things. So they're
Yes.
resonating. I mean, that's how you and I like connected, right? Was an
Yes.
email that I wrote that I normally didn't, because I told a story about my kids and how being a parent is similar to running a business. There are some similarities, not all, but
Hmm.
uh and so it has been a profound
Mm.
lesson that I got from you that feels doable, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
I
So
love that.
I'm publicly thanking you. And if you have store problems, keep listening with storytelling, because it just gets better from here.
Love it.
How do we know when a story is on brand for our business?
Hmm.
People sometimes have stories of, loss that maybe are private to them, or
Hmm.
they have stories that maybe will not resonate like with their audience. Or how do
Hmm.
you assess the story that you have and make sure it's on brand and a right fit for your audience? Because that seems
Mm.
very tricky to me.
It can be. And it really depends on how much you're leveraging your personal brand for your business.
Ah,
So
ooh.
this is a way to think about it. So if you are, say you have a perhaps product-based business that doesn't often reflect your own face or your brand or who you are as the founder. That can be where it gets really can be tricky. And it's not that you don't ever share those stories. It's just when you're doing that with less of a prevalent personal brand, you have to make sure that you tie the story closer to the brand and business's values as opposed to you as an individual. So that's how you can start to make some of those connections if you have a business where you don't lean as heavily on your personal brand. Now, if you do have more of a service based business where you are the face of that brand, that is much, much easier in a sense where you don't, I think sometimes you don't have to ask yourself so many questions of like, is this on brand? Or
Stop
it's a little
overthinking.
easier. Stop overthinking, because here's the beautiful part of your personal brand is that it's people are relating to you. And so you get to almost exemplify and amplify the services that you offer based on how you share your own personal brand and your own story and how people relate to you. And I think it's a huge shame when we don't know, when we overthink if we should share something or not, because it can really, it can take away the ability for someone to connect with you. And that's so important in today's online industry. We are craving real connections from the vendors that we hire, the service providers, the influencers that we buy from, whoever it is. We're craving less filter and less perfection and more real. And so if I were to I know it's really challenging when you ask yourself, is this on brand? Is this too much? Am I oversharing? I have a couple of thoughts on that. If you will know in your gut if this is too much for you at this time. And I am like standing back here with like my like picket signs basically saying like, please do not feel the need from anyone, no matter who they are. Do not feel like you are experiencing FOMO if you're not immediately sharing your personal stories. Do not make anyone feel like you need to expose those deep, dark, vulnerable skeletons in your closet. There are things and boundaries that everyone is deserving of, and you do not have to earn those boundaries, right? There are even I am a chronic oversharer, I will say. I am very open in my life, but there are still boundaries with my relationships that I don't cross. There's boundaries with parts of my story that I don't specifically call out in detail. It doesn't mean that you can't share the learning or the lesson or the wisdom, but there are parts that you get to keep sacred to yourself. So always honoring that. And then asking yourself, if you've got a piece of content that you're not sure if it's on brand, and you have a personal brand, because that's what I have, and that's predominantly who I work with, are personal brands. If your piece of content or your story is true to your lived experiences, which it probably is if you're writing it, probably is. If it's true to your lived experiences and it has the potential to impact, inspire, or empower, or make one person feel less alone or
Oh,
more seen or heard, then I am hereby giving you permission to share that if both of those things are true.
aw, that is such good advice. That
Yeah.
is really good advice. Stop. I think we think so much of ourselves and our
Yes.
fears that we're projecting onto these people that are following us, that we're not
Yes.
considering the help it can by sharing it. And
Yes.
even if you are a business that's not a personal brand,
Hmm.
or you're nervous about sharing of yourself to begin with, you can share a story of what happened at the grocery store. Like,
Yes.
it doesn't have to be so deep so early
Yes.
either. That
Yes.
I call that the training wheel stories. And
Yes.
those are the ones that I tend to start with when I'm unsure or hesitant or don't feel like it fits this content at the moment, right?
Yes. Yes. I love the training wheel stories idea. And I too am screaming from the rooftops that every story you tell does not and should not be this like tug at the heartstrings, woe is me. Like it doesn't have
Thank
to be
you.
that way.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes.
Because when we hear a story, we
Yeah.
assume it's deep and personal.
Yes. I always try and in my messaging, in
You're
my
really good at
marketing,
that, though. You're
I
good at not saying
try.
that.
Thank you. Because I actively try to say, I am showing, yes, I'm showing you how to share your story, but I'm also showing you how to share stories. Because I think when we hear your story, we're like, oh my goodness, that's all the hard shit that has happened to me in my life. And storytelling and using stories for marketing does not have to be that way, and it should not be that way. It should be a balance of inspiring, laughing, maybe sharing an awkward story or an embarrassing story. There's so many ways that you can show your audience that you are a human, and that is the point of storytelling. It's to build connection. It's not to create this like, you know separation between you and your audience. It is not to expose everything in your past. And that is why I have started infusing more and more and more like inner work in the work that I do, in terms of releasing a lot of shame and judgment that we
Yes.
hold on our stories, because if you don't work to release that and honor your story and forgive yourself, your past self, for what you did when you didn't know better and how you handled the situations you were presented, when you don't release that before you share it, you're always going to feel this angst and your nervous system is going to be going wild when you share your story, and it's not going to feel good.
Or if you share your story.
Right.
Oftentimes, those things are gonna stop you.
Right.
This was such a juicy podcast with Heather, and I really, really was enjoying the conversation and felt like it would really resonate with my audience. And so we are dividing it in half because I like these to be easy to consume segments. And an hour and 10 minutes is really hard to do. And so many times you won't go back. But some of the juiciest pieces of this podcast were in the end. So I am excited that we're going to do a part 2. So enjoy.